All right, so what we're going to do here is do some basics of importing our image, in this case this S-Pombi cell with two fluorescent labels, into Adobe Illustrator, and then just some very basics about figure design in Illustrator. So right now we have this TIFF file of this Pombi cell. It's multi-channel, and I'm using Mac OS, so I can see it here in Finder. This is that same file as the TIFF image, and Finder recognizes that. But if you notice, if we take and just try and drag this image into Illustrator, we can do it, but what happens is we just get this black box. And the reason for this is that the image is a 16-bit TIFF. Now, we're not going to get into exactly what that means, but Illustrator can only read 8-bit TIFFs or RGB files, which are also an 8-bit. So what we need to do is save this in a way that Illustrator can read it. Now, if our images were acquired, and as you can see here, if I zoom in a bit and look more at the header here, you can see that this is a 16-bit image. That confirms that that's what's going on. We don't want to ever go from 16-bit, 8-bit in our original image. We lose information that way. So we always want to make a copy. So I'm going to duplicate this image. And now what I'm going to do, the simplest way to convert something to see what you have on your screen and make it an 8-bit image is to go to Image, Type. Here you can change it to 8-bit or RGB color. You have lots of different options. And so what we're going to do is change this to an RGB color. Create image. Yes, that's what we're going to do. Keep the source. We made a duplicate, so we're going to uncheck that. Okay, so now this is still a stack of images, but now it's RGB. And what you can do is pull out the individual images that you want with, again, duplicate, which is Shift-D, or it's hidden in the menu somewhere. Instead of don't duplicate the entire stack, just duplicate what we're looking at. Okay, you see we now have that image. We can save this, and we're going to make a copy demo to RGB. Now you can pull that in over here. And there are other ways to kind of go about doing this. You can flatten, you can make it an 8-bit, and there are benefits to doing things different ways. I'm just showing you the way that I do it, of course. I think the most important thing is that you leave the 16-bit original file alone. That way you can always come back to doing that. And an important thing to note, this little cross through here, what this means is that the image isn't actually in Illustrator. If you save this file and go to reopen it, or you send it to someone, they're not going to get this image. They're going to get an empty box because it's just linking to where the file is. It's saying, oh, this image is over here. This is demo12 RGB. And you can see that by if you click on linked file under properties, you'll see that right there. And sometimes that's useful. Sometimes if you want to update the image and have it be reflected without re-importing it, Illustrator will do that. But most of the time it's more annoying than anything, because you'll go to send it to someone, or if you move the image on your computer, it'll be lost. You'll have to relink it manually. There's not a good way to redo it. So one thing that you can do, you can probably change this in default settings. I just haven't actually bothered. But you can always just click Embed, and then now it's there. When you save this file, it will be in the file. So that's just something to keep in mind. Again, you can probably change default import settings, but out of the box, Illustrator, its default is to just link. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, and what you can do now with this file, what we want to do, of course, so it's a multi-channel image. Let's show both the single channel. So let's go back to our original image here, and let's look at, okay, it's this time point. All right, what I'm going to do now, this is our original, remember, now this is the 16-bit file. I'm going to take this, and just for simplicity, I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm just going to duplicate the channels 1 and 2 at this particular Z slice, which I can read from the header, is 5. So now I just have this. Now again, because I'm looking at a composite image, which, oops, there we go, which we're using the channels tool, you can see it's a composite image. Fiji's always got my errors. Moving this slider here doesn't do anything. It will select the channels, but it's not going to change your display. If you go to color, I think I have to restart Fiji, you can see the differences here. You can see your 2 different fluorophores. And if you go to grayscale, you see the same thing. Oh, it's very angry with me. Just like that. And this is going to be the most useful because for images, when we're showing single channel images, by and large, we almost always want to show the grayscale or the inverted grayscale, which you can do up here by inverting the LUT. But let's just, for simplicity, do it this way. We're going to duplicate again, and this time we're only going to duplicate 1 channel. So we're going to unclick this duplicate hypersack, and what we see is what we'll get. We'll just get 1 channel. And Fiji decided that it's going to change it to, oh, it's angry with me. Sorry, I'm going to click out a few boxes. So right now it's showing us a 1-channel image. We have to go up to LUTs, or lookup tables, and you can go to grays. That's what we want. Now let's go to our other channel here, duplicate. Don't duplicate the entire hypersack, okay? It's not in grayscale. You can also go to more under the channels tool, and it gives you some of the common lookup tables. Again, Fiji's got a lot of redundancy. Okay, now we have these 2 as 16-bit images. Sometimes I think it's a good idea to save these or keep record of where they were before we destructively go to 8-bit or RGB. I'm going to go to RGB this way. Another way, you can hit Shift F, which is flatten, and this has other functionalities with ROIs and different things that we're not going to get into and overlays. But what we'll do is make an RGB image. This is kind of a shortcut. So I'm going to do Shift F, and it makes an RGB image of what we're looking at. Usually, it will make a new image. Sometimes it doesn't. I don't know exactly why that's the case, but I'm sure there's something about the image you're starting with. So assume that it's going to be destructive and that it might overwrite your image. That's always a wise assumption to make with Fiji. As you spend more time with it, you'll get a handle of when it irreversibly makes an image. The undo function doesn't always work in Fiji. Saving an original copy of your file is always what you should do. Don't rely on undo. But I should know, as long as you don't save the image, you're not going to just, you're not going to overwrite it. Fiji doesn't change the originals. Okay. Let's do that for this image over here. We flatten it. Now we have 2 RGBs. So let's save this. Let's say this is channel 1 RGB. This is channel 2 RGB. Okay, let's go to Illustrator, pull up Finder, take these 2 images, drag them in. Again, notice they've got that X. That means they're not embedded in this file. They're linked. Let's embed that now. Actually, let me just show you what happens if you change something. So let's just change the name on this. Let's say that instead of RGB, we're going to add new name at the end. Okay, so when I go back to Illustrator, oh, it's not going to do it now. Sometimes it'll alert you right away. Sometimes it'll wait until you do it, relaunch the program. So what's interesting now is this is the one I didn't change the name on. So that's number 1. You can see the linked file info up here. It will give me the embed option. Say, okay, fine, embed. This one here, it's not giving me that option. And if you see the linked file, that doesn't exist anymore. We changed the name, so it can't embed it. So even though it's not complaining yet and it's still showing you the image, were you to reopen this file, that image wouldn't be there. You'd have to relink it. And you can always click on this, relink, go back to the new file, and it's showing me a random area in my file system. Just drag that over. That's the one that we want. And you can uncheck link, and it will automatically embed it as well. Again, different ways to skin a cat. Okay, now we have our images. They're ugly. You can kind of manually move them around. We're using by default, the selection tool, which is shortcut V. can move things around. That's just totally fine. But let's say we want to like make this look good. Okay, so what we can do is, like most programs, you have the align tools. So I'm going to go to Window and just make that appear, align. This is really powerful, and it just makes things look nice. So look, we got our images roughly the way that we want them. Channel 1, channel 2, merge. Okay. So they're all over the place. Basic thing that we want to do is align them with align vertical center. Select them all. But one of the really nice things, so you can align to something. This is something PowerPoint and other image and display programs don't often have. And so let's say that I want them all aligned in the center, but I want them to this image. So what you do is you can select all of them by shift clicking. So you can select 3 things, 2 things, 1 things by holding down shift. But what you can do in Illustrator is instead of shift clicking, if you just normal click an object you already have selected, and that's what I did here. See how this dark outline comes here? This is now the key object. If I click this one's the key object. Doesn't matter, I'm just normal clicking now after they're all selected. Now when I hit, notice how what's happened over here, it says align to key object. So when I click align to center, it's going to align to this one. Boom, which is really helpful sometimes. Let's say instead this was the key object, align to center. Boom, now it does that over here, and so on and so forth. So that can be really useful when you want everything aligned to a particular thing. Sometimes you can do that in other ways. Like for example, we could align top here without doing a key thing, and that would work. But sometimes you just want to do it easily. So in addition to align to key object, you can just align to selection, which kind of just does default, which is like what PowerPoint would do, which sometimes works but sometimes doesn't. Or you can align to the artboard, which would be align these all to the center of the artboard, which you see how all of them move now. Even this one moved a little bit. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing that's really helpful, when you pick a key object, you can use this distribute spacing. And this is really cool because it says, okay, take these other objects and make them X amount of points away from this key object. So in this case, it's set to 0. That means if we click this, they'll be touching, which is usually we want a little bit of white space. So let's make that 2 points. Now you'll see there's a little bit of white space here. So that was super easy. You'll learn these, as you go along using Illustrator, you'll pick these things up, but these things can be super helpful. Last thing, we can of course add text with the type tool. Let's say that this is GFP. We then click either V or escape will get you out of your text tool, and then hit V or the selection tool to move this around. One thing to keep in mind about text is that Illustrator can be annoying with text. So if I make this larger here, see how it's like stretching it, and maybe I just wanted to make a bigger text box, not like, do weirdness like that. So there's 2 different types of text in Illustrator. Under type, you can convert to area type, and vice versa to point type. It starts off as point type. Area type is probably what you're more used to. This is a text box now. By making it bigger, you just make the text box bigger. So depending on your needs, you might want different things, either point type or area type. So it can be really frustrating when you want it to do one thing and it's doing the other. So keep that in mind. You can go back and forth. Last thing about typing, and then, because this video is rambling a bit. Sometimes you no longer want an object or text to be treated as text. You want it to be a shape. Going to Object, Expand, or Expand Appearance sometimes is what you want. Click Expand. Default options are usually good. It's going to do the object and the fill. That's fine. There's no stroke. Just hit OK. Now this is an object. So this is, for alignment purposes, for editing purposes, you can do more things with this than if it were text. Again, this is destructive though. So you undo, that's fine, but you can't, once you've edited this, it can't go back to text other than just by undoing. So that'll be helpful, I think, when you make like figure legends and make A or things like that, how you move things around. It might be useful to make this an object, and then you can edit this a lot more easy, align it than if it were a text box. So, just things to keep in mind about how these things work. Starting to make some figures here, moving things around, you'll learn by doing, but I think these key fundamental things help get going with Illustrator.